we move on to our second roundtable. So talking about how can we improve the support framework for rangers, responding to the needs that we've actually heard so far very concretely from different speakers. And as the first speaker, I would like to invite Mike Appleton to take the virtual stage, switch on his camera, switch on his microphone. Hi, Mike. And Mike is a Vice Chair, Capacity Development Initiative of IUCN WCPA. There's also other things which are perhaps, he will introduce himself next, but that's one of his key capacities. And in that capacity, Mike has been working a lot in the past to try to create and find ways to support rangers work around the world. So, hi, Mike. Great that you could join us.
Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. So IUCN WCPA, and WCPA stands for World Commission on Protected Areas, for those not so fond of acronyms, as we all shouldn't be. And so WCPA is a key player in supporting good management of protected areas and conserved areas globally. And my perhaps difficult question to you first is, Mike, what happens based on your experience and WCPA's experience if rangers are not at the center of the conservation area planning? So how will the SDG delivery suffer?
Yeah, it is a tricky question. Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. My voluntary role is Vice Chair for Capacity Development at WCPA. My real job is Director of Protected Area Management with the NGO Rewild, and I try and do both. Regarding, what happens if rangers are not at the center? Well, I mean, WCPA was set up and is a kind of expert network. It's more than 3,000 experts on protected areas around the world. And we'd actually, first of all, we'd like more rangers to be members because we consider you experts. Maybe you haven't felt yourself as considered as experts, but you are experts and we need you. Because sometimes experts come up with more and more new theories and more new paradigms, and we heap more and more expectations on protected and conserved areas. When I started out, they just did protection and research. Then we went to tourism, then we went to ecosystem services, then we went to community support, then we went to sustainable development goals. And all of these expectations land on actually a relatively small proportion of the world. But every new paradigm and every new report does not come with a funding package attached to it, which says, how do you do it? And all of that falls on rangers in the end. A few years ago, I was with a park manager in Siberia, and we were standing in the entrance of a cave. And I said, describe your job to me. And he put his hands above his head to the roof of the cave. And he said, I'm holding up the weight of the world, and it's getting heavier every day. And that's what we do to parks and rangers, the expert community. That's what people like me do. And that's what I'm trying to put right with my colleagues in WCPA. Because rangers, as already said, are the interface between the expectations of policymakers and the experts and the people and places where we want change to happen. And without them, we're going to fail. But their multifunctional role means they can't just be seen as passive operatives, which they have been till now. They have to be well-trained, adaptive people who can read and who can lead as well as follow, and who can make difficult judgments quickly and can call on the support they need. We've already heard today examples of rangers being peace negotiators, community mobilizers. They're so much more than soldiers. And if we don't pay attention to this, we'll see the current problems continue, not just in terms of shortages, deprivation, disease, and fatalities, but also in terms of failing parks and I have to say this, in terms of incidents of abuses and mistreatment of community members. It's vital that we recognize and understand that rangers are regarded by some as the enemy and as the unwitting militarized agents of those with an agenda for dispossession and denial of rights. We might not like to hear that, but that's what a lot of people are saying, and we have to acknowledge that to find the solutions. So for the SDGs to work, we need to see rangers as a vital, indispensable, but we'll fail if we see them as the only ones as the center of protected and conserved areas. They're at the center, but we need to find new models for how rangering should be, because rangers need to be respected partners also in new forms of governance for the SDGs to work.
Thanks, Mike. I'm just writing this down, hence the silence on my end, because I like the word, respected partners and linking rangers to the other players better than we've done before. That sort of makes entirely sense to me, and also it does make me as a more representative like you, and even perhaps more so, representative of the policy advice community, thinking that in our goodness, that when we try to make the policies work and also the theory work in terms of what models and approaches we foresee that would work for nature and people, if we don't think of the rangers as the implementers enough, and therefore, as you said, there's the new program, and what we basically are creating is actually more burden than anything else. And that's why the funding is so important. That's why I keep on also highlighting the funding aspect here, because nothing gets implemented without funding, proper funding, and that's what these communities would merit to receive. So, based on the experience that you've had working in this sort of perhaps interface between the implementation and the rangers, and also the more decision and policy making side as well, couple of examples that have proven, that are in place and have actually proven to be useful in support of rangers. So not only creating the burden and having to keep the roof not falling, but actually taking the weight off a little bit. Would you share some of those?
Well, I mean, actually, I'd like to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing at the moment with the International Ranger Federation and the Universal Ranger Support Alliance here, because this is really trying to plug the gap between the kind of work, great kind of work, which Thin Green Line and many others are doing in responding and dealing with the urgent, immediate day-to-day needs related to the suffering of rangers, poor training, shortages of equipment and materials, and the policy expectations we're talking about. And that's where WCPA can and is starting to do a better job. Because the International Ranger Federation's Chitwan Declaration from 2019 included a whole lot of very ambitious goals. And it became clear to those of us who were there who weren't rangers, that they really needed help to mobilize essential high-level support to get these things done. Otherwise, this would become another sort of paper declaration which was full of high ambitions but couldn't be realized. And therefore, we joined with 7 other organizations, including the IRF, to establish the Ranger Support Alliance, really building global support and frameworks of policy, minimum standards, and good practices to meet the challenges of 30 by 30 in the SDGs. And what we're doing is trying to institutionalize and normalize many of the solutions which are now being dealt with by Thin Green Line and many others. And we're trying to mobilize donors, governments, and employees to take those on. So the burden is on them. Ultimately, our ambition is that Sean can have a day off now and again. We've already published a first global code of conduct for rangers, which is actually already being picked up and adopted by several countries. It's the first ever code of conduct. We're following that up with global guidelines on safeguarding to actually try to help ranger organizations prevent and deal with incidents of abuse and misconduct. A fairly hard-hitting report on rangers and gender is being launched quite shortly on the 8th of July. And we're also proud to be working for actual formal recognition by the International Labour Organization of the rights of rangers, so that they're seen actually, so that they actually have globally recognized labor rights. And the URSA Full Action Plan is being launched on the 14th of July. So those are some of the things which we are trying to do now to plug the gap. There are lots of other projects we publish, lots of good practice guidelines, events and webinars, but now we see our place as building that bridge between what rangers want and what the people with the resources and the power can deliver.
Thanks, Mike. And if I may follow up on that, in my line of work, which is not directly linked with rangers, but nature conservation more broadly, often to make something like this happen, you will start also by getting some governments on your side, like getting some governments championing something like this, you know, in their practices and, you know, also their support and, you know, so in terms of, you know, what you just described, you know, are there already some governments coming forward, you know, for example, you know, sitting in the UK, have you been able to have their ear or somebody, you know, other governments' ear in this regard, that they would be, you know, starting to champion this also in the international arena?
And we're starting on that. I mean, the government of Bhutan has always been a fantastic supporter of these things. They're already talking about adopting the Ranger Code of Conduct. We're also working on the Code of Conduct with South Africa, actually, with South African national parks as well. So we're just starting out on this, but yeah, that's where we need to go next.
Yeah, precisely. And then, you know, from there to regional, then to the different, but that sounds like that you are on the way already. Final question then, one key wish for the post-2020 upcoming 2030 biodiversity era. That's obviously where we are now. You know, our current framework for global biodiversity conservation under the UN Convention is running to its end, and we're looking towards the new one. And obviously we have hopes and wishes there for rangers to be better taken into consideration. Any key wishes?
Have I only got one?
I'm hoping to know to one, but, you know, if you are quick, you can put two in.
Well, I mean, what my wish is a different kind of ranger and a different kind of rangering environment, and rangers who don't need guns. That's my wish. And to achieve this, you know, we need to work towards more holistic ways of problem solving and more inclusive ways of managing parks and protected areas, so that, as I said before, rangers are respected, accepted and trusted members of the community, rather than agents of a particular organization. And actually, I don't think, when you look at it, the real interests of local communities and rangers are very far apart. I think we have far more in common. You know, there is far more in common than there are differences. And with some work, actually rangers can be part of this amazing partnership to deliver the SDGs and 30 by 30.
Thanks, Mike. Fantastic. And certainly not through the experiences that we recorded and put together in our SDG product area guidance. Obviously, those were best practice ones, but, you know, what they showed was precisely this, that, you know, rangers and the local communities working together or working, you know, in synergy to support things rather than, you know, there being any conflicts. Thank you, Mike. Fantastic insights from the past, you know, decade or more, I guess, you know, working in this context. So great to have them around this virtual table to be shared. Stay tuned while we move on to our next panelist. So inviting, let's just get me my notes here. So inviting Ms. Ana Maria Gonzalez, who is Senior Environmental Specialist and Coordinator of the Amazon Sustainable Landscapes Program at the Environment, Natural Resources and Blue Economy Group at the World Bank. Hi, Anna.
Hi, good morning. Hi, or welcome. Good afternoon, everybody.
Depending on where you are, indeed.
Exactly.
Precisely. So briefly, could you just tell us what is the Amazon Sustainable Landscapes Program, ASL, and how does it deliver SDGs through the area-based conservation? And also, what is the role of rangers in that, obviously, given today's program?
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm very delighted to be here and represent the World Bank and the Amazon Sustainable Landscape Program. This program, the ASL, is a $113 million impact program. It's funded by the Global Environmental Facility, the GEF, and currently it includes 5 national projects in Brazil, Colombia, and Peru, and a regional coordination project. So in addition to the World Bank, which is the lead agency of the program, WWF and UNDP support these governments, the governments of these countries, to prepare and supervise and implement the projects. Second phase is about to kick off, and this expands the geographic coverage beyond the 3 countries I just mentioned to Bolivia, Ecuador, Guyana, and Suriname, their Amazon regions from those countries. So to the question about the SDGs, we reviewed the excellent guide and could and can corroborate that through area-based conservation, the ASL directly contributes to 8 of the 17 SDGs, and rangers are involved in all of this. So just to give you a few examples, on the ASL, on the SDGs related to environment, SDG 13, climate action, and 15, life on land, the ASL supports, and the rangers involved in the ASL support through the creation of 4.3 million hectares of protected areas in the Amazon region, promoting also the financial sustainability of protected area systems, and improving the management effectiveness of 66 million hectares of protected areas in these 3 countries, and all of which contribute to conservation and carbon capture. On a second set of examples, like the ones that are involved with people and prosperity dimensions, the ASL contributes to SDG 1 on no poverty, 5, gender equality, 8 on decent work and economic growth, and 10 on reduced inequalities. And this is done through sustainable production and landscape management, restoration inside and outside protected areas, promotion of green value chains, and improving gender balance in terms of increased participation, decision-making, and greater access to and control of their natural resources. And finally, the contribution on the SDGs that have to do with peace and partnership dimensions. So it's SDG 16 on peace, justice, and strong institutions, and you all know the names that I'm just mentioning, the 17 on partnerships. And here, the example to bring is that the regional project that it's part of the ASL promotes and facilitates coordination between national and subnational governments, park agencies between the different countries, and all to achieve regional coordination goals, as well as strengthen forest governance at the different levels and scales. And the program really emphasizes the importance of partnerships, whether that be technical knowledge exchange, even donor coordination, or joint communication and awareness raising. And one significant example was the Leticia Pact, which is a pact signed by the presidents of seven of the Amazon countries to promote collaboration and protect the biome, including its protected areas. And the ASL was mentioned as an example of international funding towards cooperation. So that's my short answer.
Short answer to that, yeah, thanks. If I may just briefly try to hone into that a bit more detailedly. So could you said that, there's a lot of partnership building there, isn't there? And you said that, rangers are at the core of that, but would you have like a really concrete example as to a partnership, for example, as part of the program or project where rangers are, part of and carry a certain task or are playing a certain role? Would something like that come to mind as to share to make it more concrete for us?
Yes, so one example is that the ASL, and this is not only the program, like we're scaling up processes done and built and supported by the governments, but in an area that it's shared between Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador, there's 3 protected areas that are just next to each other. And for the past 10 years, there is a memorandum of understanding between those protected areas. And there are agreed and protocols for command and control and for exchange and support between the protected areas and the rangers. So there's knowledge exchange, supportive activities, information about some of the threats that cross the borders, and also the species that cross the borders, like the good and the bad cross the borders. And so there is this example of regional collaboration that has the support of the governments and the structure, but it really comes to the point of the rangers talking to each other, letting each other know, and using some tools that will help them communicate.
Fantastic, thank you. Then based on the experience you have from the ASL program basis, what would you say that would be maybe a key golden rules or recommendations for funders like the World Bank to support rangers So, if you could draw from the experience and say, well, any project in the future should really not forget to do this thing, what would it be?
Well, so to the question, golden rules, I would think of 3 golden rules. 3 is a nice number. I'm sure there are more. So one would be first to recognize the ranger's value to not just to conservation, but also to development. And so in addition to the conservation and development benefits provided by rangers, there's and can be valued in terms of in economic terms. There's a specific argument that I want to highlight, and that was mentioned by Abby, and it's about a study that was published by the World Bank through the Global Wildlife Program. Its name is Banking on Protected Areas, and part of the goal of the study was to calculate the economic impact of hiring a ranger from the community to the local economy. So they do, the study has examples from Brazil, from Zambia, from Nepal. I'm just gonna give you a figure from the Brazil Albornoz National Park. And so what the study calculated was, if the government hires a ranger from the community, it would increase the labor income in and around the park and generate high income multipliers, because the ranger would then spend that money in the community. So the study estimates that to hire a ranger is under $9,000 per year, but the real income that this person can generate is over $24,000 US. So the local economy multiplier is 2.6 in Brazil. In the Zambia and Nepal are different numbers, but it's always a positive and high significant number. So that would be one of the rules, to just value and try to put the goals and the efforts of the rangers in different languages and different ways to understand it. Second is to create, and I've heard it before, create mechanisms for long-term sustainable funding of the rangers. So because ensuring long-term conservation of the country's natural capital is not possible without addressing that huge financing gap that suffer protected areas and effective conservation areas. And also rangers' jobs, cannot continue being informal, poor-paying jobs without all the job-related benefits and securities. Paying rangers as civil service should come from public budgets and not be dependent on international projects that has limited duration. That puts a strain on ranger security. So while rangers should be integrated into government budgetary commitments, of course, the effectiveness of the work that they do on the ground has to have sufficient funding. So one of the things that the World Bank and with the ASL has done is to design such mechanisms to finance the long-term long-term continuance of protected area systems. And one example is in Peru with the initiative called Patrimonio Natural del Perú, so Natural Patrimony of Peru, that combines private, public, and multilateral financial support to covering the cost of the protected areas. And the same is with ARPA in Brazil and Herencia Colombia Heritage. So in those cases, multilateral institutions like the World Bank and other financial institutions can provide technical assistance, can offer other financial instruments, both grants and loans, to complement conservation efforts, but also to encourage legislative and policy changes that will provide and support long-term financing for conservation, but also included in it like a long-term and a better situation for park rangers. And finally, training, capacity building, strengthening institutions, like the whole package, because we've seen and we heard from them that rangers, besides their purist environmental work, they do a lot of other activities that have to do with the sort of the broader understanding of development. And so rangers need multiple skills, management skills, social skills, knowledge of laws, security, And I know that Mandy, who's coming after me, is going to talk about the Global Wildlife Program, but I used to work with the bank in that program. And I know that there's important projects there that have provided that capacity building and that strengthening of the rangers. So just to end, I think that it's important that we learn from those projects, that we learn and we encourage the work of organizations that like the Thin Green Line Foundation. And we hear, as we have had the luxury to hear today, we hear the voices of the rangers, both women and men, who are at the front line, and we should support, and really we should serve them. So that's would be my broader golden rules. Thank you.
Thanks, Ana Maria. Sounds quite good golden rules to me, and also it's also nice to hear that, from the World Bank side, at least from that, very rather large program, that if these are taking place, I think there's a good multiplier impact, hopefully also for the future. Thanks so much. And then moving on to Mandy Cadman, who is Senior Technician Advisor for Ecosystems and Biodiversity, African region, and the UNDP lead for the GEF-financed, World Bank-led Global Wildlife Program at the UNDP. So hi, Mandy, are you there? Yes, you are. Fantastic.
I'm here indeed, yes.
Great.
So all this time.
Fantastic.
So thank you very much for the introduction. And yes, I support a suite of GEF-financed projects in Africa, Southern Africa, East Africa. Many of these have a protected area focus, and also support a number of the Global Wildlife Program projects in Africa. And more recently, as you said correctly, Marianne, I'm our focal point for our full portfolio of Global Wildlife Program projects, which I will speak about, when we get into the discussion.
Fantastic. Question to you, Mandy, first. How does support to rangers, as is the topic of the day, feature in the programs that are funded by or through the UNDP, like the ones you're working on? For example, the Global Wildlife Program. Are there some key strategic principles in place that ensures that the funding is also appropriately addressing the issues that we've already heard from the panelists today? How does the UNDP see this?
Yes, well, thanks for that. I think it's important to remember that UNDP as a GEF agency is responsible for overseeing the implementation of GEF-financed projects, which governments have conceived of. So, governments come to the GEF with a concept for how they would use their GEF allocations. So, in a way, we can't at the outset decide how a government should spend its money, but it is very much within our scope of influence to do exactly as you've said, and that is to help make sure that things like support to rangers are adequately captured and appropriately implemented under projects that we support. So just briefly, in the past 2 decades, let's say, UNDP has supported a suite of just over 200 projects that focus on strengthening protected and conserved areas around the world, 126 countries, with a GEF investment of just over $780 million US. And many of those projects have had as a key component of the work strengthening the capacity of protected area management agencies, or working with communities who manage community conserved areas to increase their capacity to manage the areas under their watch. So this means working with ranger forces, and of course use of the term ranger is it's a little bit of a catch-all. So it's everything from sort of conservation managers right through to law enforcement officers and our community influencers. So this has been a very important aspect of the projects that UNDP has supported over the years, with the support focusing in various ways. A big focus is always the enabling environment, looking at these issues of policy so that what we are investing in shouldn't lack sustainability, making sure that things are captured in policy, as well as more direct support to meeting the practical needs of ranger forces, all the kinds of things that our rangers have been speaking about today. Now, under the Global Wildlife Program, we currently have 14 projects that we support in Africa and the Asia Pacific region. And then coming on now under the GEF-7 cycle, we have another 6 projects, 2 of which are now also in Latin America and Caribbean. And the Global Wildlife Program, of course, has a very strong focus on addressing poaching, wildlife crime more broadly, and the illegal wildlife trade. So these projects have a very specific focus on strengthening the capacity of ranger forces, quite a lot of focus on law enforcement, but also on community engagement and awareness raising. So yes, UNDP certainly has a very strong focus of activity on this. And strategic principles, obviously, as an arm of the UN and a development agency, implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals is key to our mission, and it cuts across everything that we do. But there are some other really important strategic principles that we are trying to make sure that our projects implement. And one of them goes to the issue which Mark Appleton spoke about, and which Claudel and one or two others have mentioned, and that is that especially the work related to law enforcement, this is a high-risk area of work. There's risks that rangers face, and there are risks that rangers might pose to communities. And so what we do through our projects is make sure that our social and environmental standards policy is used to influence the project design, to make sure that we identify these risks and have appropriate risk management plans in place, and that training, for example, includes elements such as human rights, things that perhaps have not classically been part of or been thought of as part of ranger training.
Yep.
So that is a really important principle, as well as issues such as gender equity, women's empowerment, involvement of youth, and then also working across institutions and sectors. So making sure that managing our natural capital through protected areas, conserved areas, and other parts of the landscape, that we connect across those, so that ranger forces and protected area managers aren't seen in isolation from other users of the landscape. So I think those would be some key principles that we try to make sure are embedded across the work we support.
Great, thanks, Mandy. And you already provided some concrete examples of actually ongoing and recent projects that have a ranger focus. So maybe, in the interest of time, I'm just going to ask you the follow-up of that question, which is, what do you see, perhaps yourself as a project officer contact point, or perhaps even UNDP sees more broadly as the anticipated benefits of having rangers involved? What have you experienced? When you have rangers involved, well involved, and good project management, this and this thing, these things happen. So what have you observed in terms of the benefits, and what benefits you create by this involvement?
Yeah, without the involvement of rangers, and let's say everything from state employed rangers through to community forest monitors, or whatever name they might have, without them, these projects can't achieve their outcomes in terms of managing the natural resource base, because they are the frontline workers. They're the first defenders. They are our natural capital asset managers, if we want to put it that way. So they are central, and therefore central to delivery of all the outcomes that depend on their service and capacity. So yeah, and those benefits extend way beyond the practical physical management of species or habitats. I think there are these, the other things: partnerships, peace, stability, social cohesion. Rangers play a really important role in many of the landscapes we work in underpinning social cohesion. So these are the kinds of benefits that we look to deliver. as part of, placing this work at the heart of the Sustainable Development Agenda.
Fantastic, thank you, Mandy. And I kind of that was already been in between line of your answers and other people's answers as well. But it's quite nice to tease it out and very explicitly say, here are the key workers and here are the benefits, which indeed are much broader than the conservation of species or habitats, but all the other SDG related wider benefits as well. Thanks, Mandy, and I'm really happy you could join us. I'm really also happy that you shared the UNDP experiences and insights through the project you're working on, and that our connection to South Africa held throughout the whole event. So great to have had you with us.